Day 4, Voodoo. God, I hate setting this add-on up. But first we need to install it, so let's go over to Curse Client. I'm going to install two add-ons today. First is obviously Voodoo, which is a RAID frame, sort of like Grid, I guess, if you're used to that. It has built-in click, or click to cast, or can't think of any others. The second thing we're going to install is one called Fonter. I'm not actually going to set that up today, but it comes with a handful of fonts that I want to be able to use in my unit frames and in other add-ons. So by installing it now, we'll gain access to them even if I ignore it for a couple of days. So downloads are going. You can see Fonter is quite large because it has, 20 or 30 fonts in it. We're also doing Voodoo now for basically the same reason. It has some textures that I want to be able to use. Mostly the plain background. Alright, there we go. Let's fire up Warcraft and get at her. Okay, so hit add-ons. You can see Fonter's installed, along with its custom fonts, which is something, that's the reason we installed that now rather than later. And Voodoo is in there, and you can see that it's not out of date, nor is Fonter. So let's enter world. So Voodoo is here, and it's puked some frames into our UI. But before I mess with that, I'm going to show you that what I did for my unit frames here. You can see the fonts are a little different than last time. And that's just because I went in earlier and set them up. So if you just come in Fonter, into Pitbull. And under texts for normal, so set the default font to Accidental Presidency. On the normal layout, I have basically two under names. Name and health are at 180 and Accidental Presidency. There we go. Also at 180. And what's the other indicator? Power and absolute health. See our 85% cabin. And those are both from Fonter. Other add-ons sometimes bundle it, but that's where we're getting them from. So anyway, that's decent enough. What else? The same thing on the box layout. The name is cabin at 85%, so it's consistent. And tiny, which is my focus setup. We only have two, name and health, and they're both Accidental Presidency at 25%. So I did that in advance just so you didn't have to watch me clicking through all of them and setting that. So my unit frames are done now. I don't have to play with those anymore. I'm quite happy with them. Let's do Voodoo. /vd opt brings up its configuration. And the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this buff watch thing. If you click on buffs and then general and click on enabled to turn it off, so switch it to disabled, it goes away. The next thing I'm going to do is come over to panels. Actually, I'm going to come over to move. And you can see these are all the different panels it comes with by default. And I hate defaults. So I'm going to click the X's for all of them and just delete everything I can. Let's get rid of that. Get rid of this one called pets. Optional tanks. Good, they're all gone. And you can see here there's this add new panel and there's also this whole detest section. I'm just going to click on 10 and that'll sort of give you fake unit frames as if you were in a 10-man raid. So while you're setting things up, you can kind of get a preview. Every time you reload your UI or switch settings, you might have to come in and turn that back on. But I think it's really nice to be able to lay things out without guessing the way you have to with Grid. It's one of the reasons I like Voodoo over Grid. It's probably the only reason, actually. So anyway, that's there. I'm going to hit Add a New Panel, which gives me a nice empty one. I click the plus. I'm going to add Group 1. Hit OK. Now if I hit the plus again, it defaults to adding Group 2. OK. Now if you add a third one, you can see that Group isn't the only option. You could also do, for example, classes and have all of your warriors in one. Or you could do special and say, pets or assists or people flagged as tanks. And you can set up multiple panels for all of that. I don't find that particularly useful. so I'm just not going to do it. I'm just going to have the 2 groups. Now when I click on panels, you'll see a preview as if I was in a 10-man raid. Now, for ordering, I like mine to match the Blizzard raid panel. So I have my ordering set to grouped, which is good. And I'm going to turn on hide if empty. And I'm going to turn off me first. I don't want it to rearrange. I want me to be in wherever it is I'm in. It's useful sometimes for, say if you're running a pug and you're trying to hand out loot to people, things like living embers or primordial serenites. This whole roll random 1 to 100 nonsense I think is really annoying. I usually just /random 10 and hand it to whoever the 10th person or whoever's number rolls up. So if I /random 25 and number 13 goes up, that would be the 3rd person in group 3 is going to get that piece of loot. So our panel's good. We have a nice, demo 10-man raid, but it looks like crap. The first thing you'll notice is I lay out my raid frames horizontally. There's 2 ways to do that. First, you could click horizontal. That puts group 1 on top, group 2 on the bottom. If you were doing 25-man, you'd have 3, 4, and 5 that you would have added, and they'd be underneath. Another way to do it is to put your maximum columns to 5 and your maximum rows to 1. And you'll see group 1 goes this way, group 2 the same, but there's headers above and below. And that has some implications for gaps and spacing and whatnot. I'm just not going to do that because it's actually a big pain in the ass. So I'm going to switch this back to maximum rows to 2. Maximum columns to 5 is fine. I'm going to switch to horizontal. If we come down to headers and I just make them a bit bigger, you can see it's group 1, group 2. Excellent. I know where my groups are. I'm never going to forget group 1 is on top. I turn those off. It's useless information. Back under general. That's pretty much everything that you need to set up. You can see there's an anchor option. That means anchor to the top left. If I was going to set my raid frames up on the left side, or maybe centered on my screen, I might use one of these other positions. Like if I was growing it, maybe I wanted it under my unit frames, I might use centered here. If I was growing it above, I'd probably set it there. So there's different options to anchor, but I'm using top left because that's where I'm growing from. I want my sort by unit ID, so it's just going to match the way they appear in the Blizzard raid UI. That's all good. Let's go to sizing. And the first thing we're going to look at is width, obviously. Pretty obvious. Make them bigger, and height makes it taller. This configuration window is dreadful. It's actually really hard to get exactly the sizes you want. So if I do, it's because I'm lucky. So I'm going to start with 80 by 90. That's close enough for government work, I guess is the British phrase for it. And I'm just going to put that roughly there. And that's all right. A lot of this sizing and positioning stuff is sort of 1 pixel tedium, and you're not going to want to watch me shift things by tiny little amounts for 15 minutes, getting them laid out properly. I'm going to just leave that out and assume that you do it on your own. So our spacing is the only other options we have here. We have the gap, which is the space around the panel, so you can see the background and the border. And then there's the spacing itself, which is the distance between the individual unit frames. Now, I don't use a background behind my unit frames or raid frames, so I should set the gap to nothing, as small as I can. And actually, I'm going to leave that big for a sec. I'm going to go back to general here. You see the background, make it 0 opacity. And I'm going to go to the panel border and do the same. You can see that didn't get rid of this black thing. That's because you have to come down to the actual border texture and set it to none. So there we go. Back to sizing. Obviously I don't want height and whatnot is fine. I want to get rid of the gaps. Set this back to, I'm going to guess 90 is about good. And height, use 80s, probably fine. Good. So now all I need to do is set my spacing to something consistent with the rest of my UI, which is, I think, 5 or 4 pixels. 5 is probably good, so I'm going to set that to 5 and this to 5. There we go. So that's roughly the right size and shape, and you can see the gaps aren't too bad. These icons are making it really hard to lay things out though. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and just come over to General. And I'm going to click on Indicators. And this special dot where it's set to roll icon, I'm going to set to nothing. There we go. So now I can come back to panels. You see panel 1 here. Not quite lined up right, but that's good enough. So we can go into bars. And that's these the actual background graphics and whatnot. Obviously this polished wood texture just doesn't match anything that I do. So switch that to plain. Likewise, there's a mana bar here. I'm going to make it huge. And while it's nice to know what your healer mana is, especially if you have something like, for example, Hymn of Hope, it doesn't need to be super prominent. So I'm going to set it to about 7. Big enough to keep an eye on, but small enough that I can ignore it. And I'm going to get rid of these side widths because I just don't use them. It's not on the side, having them as small as I can makes it easier to pay attention to. And lastly is this damage flash. If you think of an encounter like Ascending Council, when someone is gravity crushed, they're taking heavy damage. And this damage flash will make them sort of light up so that you'll know, or that they'll be easier to find in your raid frames when you need to heal them. So I'm going to turn that off because I don't heal people. And I don't bop them, and I don't lay of hands them. So I'm just going to have that plain off. I don't need it. Headers we've already turned off. Targets. There's an option to show target of target for these people. It's not something I use, so I'm just going to leave that turned off. Tooltips. Voodoo has its own tooltip, and it's really ugly. So I'm just going to turn that off. The other option here is this in-fight checkbox. While you're in combat, Voodoo suppresses tooltips when you mouse over units. I can't think of a good reason why you would want that turned off so that you can get tooltips in combat. It just makes it really hard to read anything. So I keep that unchecked. So text. First thing to do is set the anchor position. I have mine in my top corner here. And then my hit points text, I don't have top, I have it underneath the name. Pet owner is not something I ever care about because I never show pets. So I'm going to turn that off. Now we have a couple of options for the font sizing and colors and stuff. First thing I'm going to do is pick Accidental Presidency for consistency. And I'm going to set the size up to probably 14. Yeah, that looks good. And my life text size I want as big as I can get. So that's good. I'm going to turn off this hide irrelevant. And what that does is when someone is full health, it doesn't show any text for them. And so that lets you, makes it easier to ignore people who are full health, because almost always, if someone is full health, that's a good thing. You don't need any attention drawn to that. But this guy at 81%, that's useful to know because maybe I'm avoiding breaking a magma trap until he's over, maybe 80% is when I would break it, but I can see he's fine, just barely. This guy at 70, he's not high enough. This guy at 67, not high enough. Likewise, I'm going to leave this AFK and RIP is for dead, not because they have a druid ability on them. Just going to leave those on for now, but usually I would turn off flags too. The reason I'm leaving it on is because it makes it easier to set up bouquets later on. Anyway, that looks decent enough. I'm going to turn on class color for the name text. It's just something that I like to have. I don't want my background showing who's a rogue versus who's a mage. I think the text is enough for that. Hot icons. First thing to remember is if you're a priest, turn this off unless you're disc. It puts this really strange icon that tracks how much absorb is left on your shield and how much weaken soul is all in one. And I find it really hard to read. I don't think it's very good. I'm also going to turn off all of these hot tracking icon things. I just don't heal people, so I don't need to track hot, so I'm turning them off. Likewise, there's one for hot bars where they're just sort of progress bars for hots. I don't do that either, so I'm just making sure they're all empty. They're effectively off for me. And I'm going to turn off this overheal text. I don't heal people. I don't need to track overhealing. While we're here, I'm going to set up my raid icon, or raid target icon. You can see that there's no really easy way to get a preview of what raid icons look like by default. So I'm going to come over to move and switch it to current again, and then go back to panels. And I'm going to set a skull on me. And that seems to work. Now, typically I have had my raid icons mounted over here. I'm going to just make it a bit smaller. And I've typically put it over here, but I think it works better down there. So I'm going to have it mounted to the bottom right corner. I want it to overlap the mana bar because, yeah, just above, say 8. There we go. And 2 maybe? -2. There we go. SZ0 was pretty good. There. And that just makes it nice and easy to see. One thing I want to do is come up here and just take a bit of fall damage so I can make sure that it's not overlapping my health text. So fall. That's pretty good. In fact, I can probably scale that up. There we go. So nice big icon that's easy to see, but it doesn't cover up anything important. And then it leaves this space as a spot to put buff and debuff icons. So I'm going to leave that as is. Come back to move and switch it to 10 man again. And go to panels. And we've pretty much run through all these options, so we're doing pretty good. Next up I'm going to go over to spells. And I'm just going to turn off everything. It comes with defaults. You can mouse bind all of your heals and whatnot in here if you want to. It's probably more of a healer thing than a DPS thing. Chances are the only thing DPS cares about would be like remove curse, cure disease, maybe hand of protection, and like a combat res. So I'm going to turn off all those. For right clicking, I want to leap of faith. I'm going to put that in there. For middle button, I want binding heal. And for button 4, I want cure disease. Usually I'd have, what is that, dispel magic, but priests can't dispel their friends anymore. So, at least not if you're shadow. So, I'm not going to bother binding that. I'm going to come over to shift. And shift right, I want to be the menu, the standard issue Blizzard menu. And middle button, oh, the hell, make it prayer of healing. And button 4, power word shield. And if you need any more healing than that from me, things have gone to hell. So that seems pretty decent. Is there anything else? Under none. Oh, on left button I probably want it to be target. So I can click on someone to make them my target. It's useful for summoning and stuff. That'll do. So there's options to set up special bindings. And I just don't use Voodoo for that. I think there's no point. There's an option to automatically trigger trinkets, like on-use trinkets when you use certain abilities. I'm going to turn that off. I manage my trinkets manually if I have that kind of trinket. The hostile option would let you bind, for example, right-clicking on someone as a mage might be, I don't know, what would that be, remove curse? But if they're hostile, you can't remove curse. But you could, for example, sheep them. So you could say, by default, right-clicking on someone removes curse. If they've been mind-controlled, then it will sheep them. Kind of useful, but I don't have any abilities that can take advantage of that. So I'm going to turn that off. And the last one is Smart Cast. I don't have a battle res, and I don't think I've ever wanted to cleanse someone before healing them out of combat, so I'm going to turn that off. I do, however, like this automatically res dead players out of combat. I'm going to leave that on. So basically that means I can, suppose we kill a boss but someone died in combat and we didn't combat res them. If I use any of my binds on them, like right click for Leap of Faith, that'll be converted into a resurrection on them. So I don't have to have a special bind for res. It only works out of combat, and it only works when I, right click on a friendly target. So that works pretty well. So I'm quite happy with that. I guess it's time to move on to indicators. So click on general, click on threat and incoming. And I can't do anything with incoming heals. That's not information I care about. So I'm turning all that off. and I'm going to check the aggro indicator on. You can see this second person here has little markers. That's because he would have threat. But I'm only going to do one side. Just one's good enough. And you can see this guy has threat with little markers. That's all I really care about. It's plenty. Enough to know who's tanking. So that's all good. So now into indicators proper. And they're all best just turned off to start with. So off, 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 and off. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into these and click Edit. And I'm going to pick one that I like. So this is a mana bar, so I'm going to click mana bars, mana only, which is one I would normally use. But I'm going to give a new name, 0MB. I'm going to click Copy. I'm going to go back. I'm going to set my mana bar to that copy. I'm going to do the same for background. So Edit. I like background solid. I'm going to choose OBG. Choose Copy. Go back. I'm going to set it to OBG. And I'm going to do the same for health bar. So Edit. And I'm going to use health generic solid. And I give 0 HB. And the reason I'm doing that is because of this generic do not change details thing. I don't want to accidentally override any of the default settings. I want to be able to go back to them. I don't know, maybe if I'm rebuilding my UI or something. Or maybe I just completely screw everything up. So by making copies, I'm protecting the defaults. So health bar is going to set to OHB. So that's pretty decent. It's a good starting point. Now, you've probably seen my health bars are all fill up the more damage you're taking. I use my unit frames and whatnot as a how much damage has someone taken, not how much health do they have indicator. So, you know, I'm full health right now. My unit frames are basically bland. They're empty. I have taken no damage, so they display no damage. And default raid frame setups is sort of the opposite. I guess that's maybe a healing idea. So I'm just going to come in and set my raid frames to match my unit frames. So I'm going to come over to, we'll start at the bottom and work our way up. So I'm going to come into health bar and click on more and choose invert. So the bars, the more damage you've taken, the bigger your bar is going to be. So you can see this guy at 86% has a very small bar. This guy at 31% has a very big bar. So that's good. And I'm going to turn axis because I like mine to fill towards the left. I set the background to the wrong one. I'm going to just fix that quickly. There we go. So I like that. I'm going to do the same for mana bar. Just going to switch to invert, turn axis, and I'm going to pick a nice plain texture. Perfect. Next thing up. Like grid, the background can be set here as well for everything. So I'm just going to come in and say, use the plain one. Done. There we go. I'm going to toggle back and forth and you can get some new people generated for you with different statuses. So here's a guy with a magic debuff. What else we got? Here's someone who's AFK. That guy's super low health with aggro. And it's a mage, so he's going to die. So sometimes if you're trying to set up a specific condition, you have to just, click back and forth and have Voodoo generate new units for you to play with. This looks like a pretty decent set, though. We've got a disconnected guy, an AFK guy, guy with a curse. That's a good starting place. Let's just use this. So I'm going to start with the health bar. So I'm going to click Edit, and we're editing this 0 HB instead of the default generic solid health bar. I'm going to come through and I'm going to turn off everything. And each one of these indicators will do something based on a condition. So here's, if they have a debuff, it's going to come in and turn on certain settings. If someone is, a mage, is going to class color their bars. The higher up the more priority it has. So if you had, maybe class color set here, and then again up here with different options, like maybe someone is out of range, you wanted to change their, I don't know, opacity of their text, you could do that. I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up. The first thing I'm going to do is there's this option for the color of the health bar status text. It's this bar that gets bigger and smaller. So I'm just going to come in here and click on the thing. I'm going to set it to black. So now I've got a black bar that gets bigger the more damage you've taken. Perfect. The option to class color text, I want on. Debuff. And set the background. And that's it. So what happens is this guy has a curse, and you can see his whole box is a big purple thing. So now I know for sure that guy's got a curse. And in a typical PvE encounter, there's only one kind of each debuff that you're actually going to care about. So if I see this guy has a curse, it's probably the one the boss put up. If I see that it's a magic debuff on maybe Cho'Gall, I know that the boss doesn't put up one of those, so it probably means that they got feared or sheeped while they were worshipping. I can perhaps mass dispel that. If you were PvPing, you might want more detail, but I don't. I only need to track basically 1 or 2 buffs per encounter, and that's plenty. If someone's dead, how do I want them to look? I do want to play with the opacity. Do I have a dead guy? Nope. So I'm going to toggle back and forth until I get someone who has rest in peace. Damn it. Nope. There we go. There's some dead people. So I'm going to set the opacity and text. Oh, I'm setting disconnected now. I'll leave that off. I need to go back to dead. So if someone is dead, background, you can't actually see a background for them because they have no health. So it just automatically makes them full. So there's nothing really to do there, but I can go to text and say opacity of the text should be dropped. So if you're dead, I'm going to set your text to probably 50 is probably good, because you might get combat resed and then I would have to know to res you. So that's good. You're not disconnected, so I can still see your text, I can still see your class, but you draw a little less attention to yourself. In fact, I might even cut that back a little more. Switch to text. Maybe 30 is good. Actually, no, I'm going to make it more so it doesn't confuse me with far away people. So 50. Come on. There we go. So that's decent enough. If someone's being resurrected, turning on this option will just make their name turn green. That's useful just for coordinating reses. It works with people using grid, etc. Yeah, having someone who's dead and being resurrected turn green is useful. Someone who's out of range. Do I have one of those people? Oh, quite a few. So I'm going to set their opacity. I like that. So first I'm going to start with them all at 100. Now, if you're out of range, I'm going to want your text and your background to be less obvious. So let's see this guy. Somewhere around 80 looks all right. Yeah, there's definitely a difference between this guy and that guy, and that's all I need. I don't need a lot of difference, just enough to say, yep, that guy's definitely out of range. 75 is good. I'm going to come to the text. I'm going to make that just a little bit lighter. That's probably good. And disconnected. So this mage over here is disconnected. So I'm going to turn on the opacity option. And I'm going to want their health bar basically invisible, down at like 20. And I'm going to want their text basically the same. So I'm going to fade it out to gray at 20. Actually, that's pretty much exactly what I want. Something like a middle gray. pretty transparent. Yeah, that's good. So you can still see that they're in your rig group, but they don't draw any attention to themselves. So that's good. And that's all of the settings for the foreground. So now I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to the background and do the same basic setup. Hit Edit and Background. So I'm going to start by turning off everything. Okay. So there we go. So our background. The very default one, I want it to be black at 100%. And I'm going to also set the opacity turned on. So I'm over here and I drag the opacity to match my unit frames. That looks like they're at 50 by default. Hit OK. Oh, back. Can I move this? Can I go like panels? Click. Nope. So I'm going to come general. Where the heck is that? Indicators. That's close enough. Might have to edit the background a little more. But that's a good starting point. So now someone has a debuff, like this guy here. I want his background to light up as well. There we go. So it's just super obvious that he's got, looks like a magic debuff. I can dispel that. I don't really want to change anything else though, so that's good. Someone who's moved out of range. I want to set the opacity. Do I have anyone out of range? Probably not in this set. I'll set the background opacity to 0 for now. I'm just going to toggle back and forth until I get someone that looks out of range. Or this guy is here. You can see his background is completely gone. So let's see. From the default, I want it to be about half what the default is. Oh, you can see that Druid is out of range too. So something down, something like that. And someone who's disconnected, like this guy. Set the opacity on. I basically want him to fade away entirely. Okay. I think that Druid might be just a little bit too out of range text. Cancel. Yeah, I'm going to just fix that Druid, and I think that's about the only thing I really wanted to get different. So I'm going to go over to health bar, hit edit, click on the out of range option, and just drop that down a bit more. Let's say 50. And there we go. Bring it back up the options. And let's get buff and debuff icons working. You can see we're pretty far along though. We just need to get our buffs done. So if you come over to debuffs, there's a few options. Only show stuff that you can remove. Only show stuff that's going to last for more than 2 seconds. You know, ignore mana burn on rogues. You know, don't worry about thunderclap on trash, that sort of thing. I'm going to basically turn these all off. And I'm going to turn on icons. And I'm going to have it only show buffs and debuffs, because that's pretty much the only thing I care about. So, you know, there's some stuff you can ignore. Anyway, if you come over to visuals, there's an option to position them. But we need something to test with. So I'm going to come over to custom, and I'm going to add one for... so I'm going to go over the defaults first. I'm going to say, show me the stacks. I don't care about the name. Yeah, I don't really care about that. Basically, I want the animation in the icon. I want it to show stacks. I want it to show a timer. So now I'm going to come in and I'm going to add one for fade as a buff. And the reason I'm doing that is because it's something I can cast pretty regularly. And I can use it to test stuff. So fade is good. I'm going to type that in and hit save. And if I just cast that, you can see I get a icon that flies in with a timer. And it's big and ugly and in the wrong place. So I'm going to come over to visuals. And something else that really annoys me about Voodoo is that this configuration is really sketchy. I know I'm going to want these down in this corner. And I know that was too damn big, so I'm going to set it down to like 4.5. That's probably good. 0.45. And I'm going to cast it again and see what it looks like. Still a bit too big, so I'll make it a bit smaller. And I'm going to drag it down to the bottom, as close as I can get. And here's another thing I hate about Voodoo. Getting precise numbers is a bitch. Cast it once more. That's pretty good. Now one thing that you'll probably notice is that there's a gap at the bottom, and that's because that's a mana bar. And because I've anchored it to the bottom, that's always going to be an issue. So instead what I'll do is anchor it to the top and drag it way the hell down and see if that's any better. And of course it's not. So I'm stuck with dealing with that gap. Let's see if we can set this to 0. And fade once more. So I want to move this up to maybe 80. Test. Waiting for fade to come off cooldown so I can try it once more. Still not enough, so I'll drag it up to like 50. I guess while I wait, I'm going to come into timer, anchor to the center. I'm going to give it an outline. I'm going to make it much smaller. Oops, didn't mean to click on that. I'm going to switch the font to Accidental Presidency just for more consistency. Move it up a bit and center it. So I want to get that to 0. That's still too big. There. That's probably good. Is that okay? I'll do the same for stacks. So I'll leave that no. I'll cast that. Yep, timer is big enough to see if I really care, but not so big that it's distracting. It's still too low, so I'm going to bump this up a bit more. Let's try 30. And then we'll come in and set up stacks while we wait. So there. What was timer set to? 55%. 41. I'm going to try and get that to 40 even. Actually, I'm going to do it the other way. I'm going to put it down the bottom at 40. Maybe a little less. 32. Yeah. Arial block. Okay. I'll do this reverse on stacks. I'm going to put them up the top as Accidental Presidency. Not really a big fan of that color. Cancel. If I pick text, I can pick a new color or something. That's good. Give it outline. Drag this up to there we go. And it's 0. About the same, I guess, you think? Timer looks good for sure. Stacks. I almost feel like it can come over just a bit. That's good. I feel like this could come over slightly too. There. Let's cast fade. You can see the text isn't anchored properly though, and that's yet another issue with Voodoo. This new anchoring thing doesn't actually work until you reload UI for some reason. So I'm just gonna shift it up a bit more. Add a bit of space on the left, and just 4 is probably fine. Try once again. That looks just about where we want it. Come up a little bit more, maybe 10. And I'm going to try and just cram in a little bit more on the left. And then we've gone too much. That's pretty much exactly what I'm after. Move this down to 22 and leave it at that. And this I'm going to push back to 6 and just leave it at that. So I hit OK. And I'm going to fade, and you'll see that it's still set up wrong right now. Defi/console reload UI. The options once more. Debuffs. You can see fade is there, it's centered properly. That all looks really good. That's exactly what we're after. So under debuffs, I'm just going to go into custom, visuals, make sure that there's only 3. I don't want to have, a whole row of debuffs in case I don't know. Can't imagine. I guess that'd be a PvP thing. I can't imagine above putting out like 4 debuffs anymore. I think only Chromagus did that. Yeah. So 3 debuffs, that's all good. I'm happy with that. I'm over to custom, and I'm going to delete my settings for fade. And that's basically all of Voodoo. That's everything that springs to mind for my setup. The last thing to do is save that profile. If you come over to Tools, you can give it a name. So I'm going to call this one Touchy 10 DPS and hit save. And now that that's here, you can say activate when there's a 5-man or a 10-man group. And it's going to load up when I'm in one of those, and otherwise it's not. So you could come in and set up a new panel. Maybe you come in and add 3 extra panels and set up a 25-man raid group. You could save that profile and have it activate on 25. Likewise, you could set, I could have this one as my DPS, which is spec 1, and maybe I could go and spec Holy as an off spec, so I would have different bindings and different displays turned on. And I could activate a different one with spec 2. I'm going to turn on quiet mode so I don't constantly see this saving message, and I'm going to turn on lock so I don't accidentally edit something and save it and blow out my profile. I guess the last thing to do is to set up the hiding. So I'm going to lock my panels in combat. In fact, I'm just going to lock them period so they won't move around by mistake. And I'm going to hide them when I'm alone. I'm going to hide them when they're empty. And that's it. Yeah, I don't really need to turn anything else on. If I'm only in a party, I actually do want to use these. I like the consistency, so I'm going to leave that. And I guess we're finished. I'm going to